Muy buenos días a todos y bienvenido a la última sesión del Seminario Permanente Interinstitucional Emociones, Activismo y Cambio Social. En esta última sesión, después de haber escuchado en
Bien,
las otras dos sesiones distintas
bien.
disciplinas, tendremos el honor de tener la doctora María Ojala de la Universidad de Oulu y Örebro en Suecia, que desde la psicología no, hablará sobre las emociones climáticas. En particular, la charla será titulada Preocupación, climática y esperanza, aprendiendo desde la psicología. Agradezco claramente el SAGE para permitir todo este evento y el Instituto de Investigación Social del UNAM para apoyarnos con la traducción simultánea de nuestra traductora favorita, Paula Salinas. Dejo la palabra a Alice, que va a presentar María.
Buenos días a todas, todos, todes. Buenos días, María. Gracias por estar con nosotros. La doctora Ojala es profesora en la Universidad de Örebro y catedrática de resiliencia socioecológica en la Universidad de Oulu, en Finlandia. Está afiliada al programa FRONT, Fronteras de la Resiliencia Ártica y Global, de la Facultad de Educación y Psicología. Y todos, muchos de nosotros, pero aquí el público la conocemos por sus intereses de investigación en
A
como
ver,
los jóvenes, ¿sí? ¿Todo bien? Como los jóvenes piensan, sienten, actúan, aprenden y se comunican sobre los problemas ambientales globales, con especial atención al cambio climático. Entonces, por eso la hemos invitado, estamos muy felices. Hoy se encontraba un poco indispuesta, pero igual está aquí con nosotros, entonces estamos de verdad muy, muy agradecidos. Entonces te pasamos la palabra, María.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction, and I will share my screen, and hopefully it will work. Just put it in a presentation mode also. Thank you. I'm very happy to have been invited to talk here. I felt a little bit bad this night, but now I'm feeling much better. So hopefully everything will go well. I will talk about climate concern and hope learning from psychology. And I have a background where I have studied young people and how they relate to global sustainability problems with a focus on climate change for more than 20 years now. And I have focused mostly on emotional reaction, anxiety, worry, and how they cope with that, and how that is related to climate change engagement of different kinds. Small things you can do in everyday life, social influence, that you are collectively engaged, and so on, but also to mental well-being and to communication patterns with parents and friends. And I perform both quantitative survey studies and qualitative studies where I have conducted interviews and let young people write about their worries. But today I'm going to focus mostly on hope, climate hope, which is another concept that I have worked with for a long time. And there I have also written more theoretical articles about this topic. And I'm going to start by giving a short background to why is it important to focus on climate change hope, and does climate change hope motivate action, or is it rather just wishful thinking that make people inactive concerning the climate problem? And we need all groups of people to be active in different ways. Well, right now there are studies showing that hopelessness, a feeling of that it is too late to do anything about climate change, is spreading. For instance, a study in Canada showed that although worry still is the most common emotions felt in relation to climate change, hopelessness was the second most common feeling. And and young people also feel a kind of helplessness and disempowerment concerning climate change. Is it too late to do anything? And this, of course, could be problematic if worry, grief, and those kinds of emotions are rather constructive forces for taking this problem seriously and could motivate learning and engagement. Hopelessness, even though we don't know actually that much about what it stands for, because it can stand for different things, but if it is equal with that one feel that it's too late to do anything about climate change, it could be a threat towards learning. For instance, why should young people put in a lot of effort in school to learn about climate change if it is too late to do anything? It could therefore also be a threat to our ability to mitigate the climate change problem, because, as I said, we need also young people, although they are not the ones who have caused this problem, but we still need them to learn to be active citizens in the future, but it can also influence today, and it's their future that is at stake. So, of course, it's important that they are active. It could also, hopelessness, be a threat to general mental well-being. We know that young people suffer, at least in the part of the world where I come from, young people suffer a lot from low mental well-being. And a study that I performed showed that if worry is to a certain extent related, weakly related to lower general mental well-being, hopelessness concerning climate change is much more strongly related to lower mental well-being. So in worst case, it could lead or increase feelings of depression and anxiety in general. And then this is more speculative, but still, it could be also a threat to democracy, because we need active citizens. And if young people, as some actually do, think that the world will go under in 30 years' time, then it's perhaps not any point in being active at all regarding other societal issues. Also, I have just gotten funding for a research program where we're gonna explore this, what climate change hopelessness stands for. But still, it's no surprise that many educators and communicators are very eager to promote hope concerning the future among young people. One can ask, is this really the right way to go? Because when I, for instance, did a study with teachers who were teaching about climate change, this study showed that this kind of promoting hope could take the form of rather shallow, hopeful messages. You just need to do something in your home, recycle, and everything will be okay. And of course, this might work with 11, 12 years old and younger children, but not with older adolescents and young adults, because they know how complex this problem is, and that it is also related to an unjust global system. So in worst case, this approach could lead to backlash, to cynicism and inactivity, and young people in that age group have a high degree of distrust toward the adults' world concerning how we deal with climate change. So how then can we go about promoting a more constructive, hopeful view of the future, a hope that can lead to active engagement at the same time as mental well-being is preserved? The aim of this presentation will be to give a short review of common ways of studying hope in general, but more specifically climate change hope in the scholarly literature, and to look at the question more empirically. Is hope related to climate change engagement, or is it more a kind of wishful thinking that will lead to inactivity? And I will argue, based on empirical and theoretical work, that hope is not only about positive visions of the future, pathways to these visions, and positive emotional states, but it's also about facing the negative, the problem that are there. And climate change is a very serious and complex problem. So it's important to face these difficult emotions that are related to this problem and to learn to cope constructively with them, also when we are talking about hope. And I'm also going to argue that we need a sort of critical emotional awareness. For instance, if we communicate about this problem or educate, but also if we are a group of people who want to be active concerning this problem. And this concept I have written about theoretically, and it is based on knowledge from psychology about how emotions influence us. But we need also to go beyond pure psychological views of emotions, because there are many actors who want to manipulate our emotions and so on concerning climate change and other societal problems. And it's important to be critical about this. And I'm going to explain this a little bit better further on in the presentation. But first, I want to go into, and this is the kind of starting point, what is hope actually? Because of course, this is a concept that we use in everyday language, but what do philosophers and other researchers say about hope? And there are many views of hope, but one basic definition that most researchers agree upon is that hope is not to be certain about that something positive will happen in the future, but it is about perceiving a possibility for something desirable to happen. So hope is strongly related to uncertainty. We don't know what the future will bring, but I can at least see that perhaps there is a possibility that we will, for instance, handle the climate change problem in a way that will not lead to the biggest catastrophes that some researchers are talking about. So if we are certain about that something positive will happen, we are talking about optimism, not hope. So in a sense, we can see here that hope is more realistic than optimism, because we don't know what is going to happen in the future. Also, hope is often related to worry. Worry is also actually related to uncertainty. It is this kind of feeling that perhaps something bad will happen in the future. And many people, also young people, when it comes to climate change, are kind of going back and forth between hope and worry. So these are really closely related, and this is also a key message that positive and so-called negative or difficult emotions are closely related, and I'm going to talk more about it later. So now I'm going to go through some ways of looking at hope in the literature, and I'm going to start with more general views about hope that is not related to climate change, but that hope researchers have talked about. And then I'm going to give some examples from my research about how these kinds of hope are present among young people when it comes to climate change more specifically. So first I'm going to start with the existential character of hope. Hope is a kind of very existential concept, and it's closely related also to religions, Christianity, for instance, and many people that do research, for instance, in theology, are working with this concept. But this view is also common in existential psychology, for instance. And here it is argued that hope is actually, we cannot like discuss, do you have hope or not? Is hope something positive or not? Because it is in a sense an existential must. Enable to be able to keep on, one needs to have hope in a sense. If one actually feel a real hopelessness, that it is too late to do anything, then it's very hard to do anything, and it will often lead to depression. And this kind of existential hope is based in a basic trust in oneself, others, and the basic goodness of existence. And in psychology, we talk about, for instance, basic trust, Erickson, or secure attachment. So this is something that you get rather early as a child if you have good people around you that can kind of adjust to your needs and so on, so you can trust those around you. But is this present among young people when they talk or write about hope in relation to climate change? Yes, it is to a certain degree. Because young people feel hopeful concerning climate change because they argue that they do have trust in humanity at large, that we will in the end kind of do something concerning the climate change problem. Young people can also have trust in that everything will work out fine in the end, despite difficulties. And here one can argue, is this not just shallow optimism? Because it seems not to be based in any kind of realistic sources. Is it just wishful thinking? Well, here we can turn to some critical scholars in, for instance, education and philosophy and social science at large, arguing that no, this is not just wishful thinking, because this is a necessary base for more evolved forms of hope. So, for instance, Freire, the well-known educationalist, argued that hope is an ontological necessity. If we give in to fatalism, then it becomes impossible to muster the strength we absolutely need for a fierce struggle that will recreate the world. So he argued that this kind of existential hope is an absolute must, but it's not enough, at least not to transform an unjust society. So it's kind of a basis, but we need something more. And now I'm going to move to a rather common way of looking at hope, both among ordinary lay people, but also psychologists. And that is to see hope as an emotion. And the emotion scholar Richard Lazarus, a psychologist who worked with emotions and coping, he said that hope is a positive emotion that is related to a cognitive appraisal, an evaluation of the situation, that there is a possibility for a desired goal to come true, even though the odds are not greatly in favor of it. So here we can see again this kind of possibility that there is uncertainty, but you can see some kind of possibility for something positive to happen, and then you feel this hopeful feeling. And positive emotions can broaden our perspective, make us come up with more creative ideas, and so on. But what Lazarus also kind of added here is that even though the odds are not greatly in favor of it, and when it comes to climate change, actually, there is one study showing that it's actually for those who are really seeing the problem as hard and perhaps almost impossible to deal with. It is for them that hope is most important. So Lazarus argued also that hope is mostly needed when we stand before really complex and uncertain problems where we are not certain of the outcome. He did not do any research about societal issues or about climate change. He and Susan Folkman argued that their research could also be valuable for societal issues, but they did not focus on that themselves. But still, of course, it fits very well with climate change. He also argued that hope is not passive, even though it's an emotion, according to him. It's also about coping actively with the negative, with the problem. So it's not about denying the problem, but to facing it in a constructive manner. So I did a review of studies with both adults and young people where I looked upon studies about hope, climate change hope, and if that is related to more active engagement or not. And what I found was that they often, it's a lot of psychology researchers, but also from others disciplines, measure this emotion, climate change hope as an emotion in a very simple way. So they forget certain things that Lazarus talked about, so that they often measure it. Do you feel hopeful that we will handle climate change in a somewhat constructive manner? And then you rate yourself from not at all to very much. And then they correlate it with, for instance, different kinds of climate engagement, things you do in everyday life, but also more political engagement. And what I could see in this review was that these studies showed that there is actually most often no relationship between feeling hopeful about the future regarding climate change and climate change engagement. So it's not a negative force, hope, that it hinders active engagement, but it's often not a positive force either. Of course, one could then criticize how these studies have been kind of designed. And I argue, for instance, that we cannot just look at hope in isolation because we as humans, and we can see that in qualitative studies, we feel a lot of different emotion. And as I said, you often go between hope and worry or hope and grief or something like that. So in studies where I have taken account of negative emotions also, for instance, a study I did already in 2008, for those who are really worried about climate change, for them, hope is actually related to more engagement. So as Lazarus argued, it's kind of hope is constructive, perhaps mostly for those who are kind of worried and feel a lot of negative emotions. But then I have also argued that we need to not only measure it as a pure emotion, but we need to remember the cognitive aspects that actually Lazarus was talking about a lot when it comes to emotions, that it's closely related also to thinking. And we need to ask what sources are this climate change hope built on? That is, why do you feel hope? And we will see that depending upon why you feel hope, there are quite different relationship to engagement or not. But first I'm going to go into another very common way, especially in psychology, to look at hope. And that is Rick Snyder's theory about hope as a cognitive concept. So he was not focusing on emotion. He said that hope is about thinking to a large degree. And he said that a hopeful person, 3 aspects need to be present. First, you need to have goals, then pathways, and then agency thinking. And you need to come up with some desirable goals. It could be a positive goal that you can see that there is a possibility for a more sustainable future. This is an approach-oriented goal. We want to reach a more sustainable society. We can see some possibility for that. But it could also be preventive, that we can see at least some possibility that we can hinder the most negative consequences of climate change. And that is a preventive goal. He also said that we need to come up, in order for us to be hopeful, we need to come up with pathways, ways to reach the desirable goal. And again, Snyder did not do research about societal problems, so he dealt with when you have a disease, or, if, let us say that you have hope that you will manage a very, very hard exam, and then you should come up with pathways to reach this goal. For instance, study each day from 8 to 5, and another pathways could be to 2 times a week meet your co-students at the campus to work together. And then he also said that a hopeful person is flexible, so if one of these pathways is blocked, they can come up with another pathway. So if there is a pandemic, for instance, and you cannot go to the campus, some will be depressed and think, oh, what shall I do now? While others who are hopeful will come up with other solutions. He also talked about agency thinking. So when we have found a desirable goal that we feel is possible to reach, we have put up pathways. We need also to constantly motivate ourselves to take these pathways. For instance, it's difficult to go up 8 o'clock each morning to study, so you need to kind of motivate yourself. So this was his way of looking at hope, and it's very common among those who work with climate change hope to measure hope in this way. Mostly they measure pathways and agency thinking. And this review that I did showed that when it comes to hope as a more cognitive aspect, it is actually much strongly related to that people are actively engaged. So when you kind of claim that hope is these cognitive aspects, then it's actually the more you are inclined to use this, the more you are inclined also to be active in different ways. So that sounds good, but there are problems with this way of looking at hope, because it's rather far from what ordinary people, but also theoreticians in other scientific disciplines, mean with hope. There is no existential aspect here, and there is hardly anything about the emotional part. Snyder did say that if you have these goals and pathways and agency thinking, you can also feel this emotion of hope, but it was not in focus of his study. Another aspect is that these researchers often measure hope as, for instance, this agency thinking as self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is already a concept in psychology, and that is about that I believe that I can conduct studies in an efficient manner. And we already know that that is related to more action. So in a sense, hope becomes redundant. There are already, you can ask, is this really hope? So therefore, I have taken a third approach to hope, where I have focused on, where I kind of measure it as an emotion, but I also take account of sources of hope. This way of looking at hope draws on theories, actually Lazarus' theory of emotions, that emphasize that different appraisals or cognitive evaluations of reality lead to emotions. So emotions and cognitions are again intertwined. So in order to know if hope as an emotion will be a constructive regarding climate engagement or not, one needs to take into account how these appraisal or sources of hope look like. They could be quite different. So I actually let young people in one study different age group of young people wrote about how come that they feel hope, and they elaborated around different sources behind hope. I have also done interviews with young people about this. And I'm not now going to present the different sources of hope, and you will then understand why hope as an emotion often is not at all related to engagement. Because one source of hope is actually hope based on denial. So young people who claim in surveys that they are really hopeful about climate change, a small group, more boys than girls, actually say, I feel hopeful because I don't think that climate change is a real problem. It's exaggerated. It's good that the summers will get warmer in the Nordic part of the world where I live, and so on. So it's actually kind of a false kind of hope, most theorists would argue. But if you just measure it as an emotion, some of those that are high on hope will base their hope on this source. And it's important to take account of this also, because I think that it might give us more clues on how to fight climate change denial among this age group. Because when we talk about climate change denial, most studies are conducted on adults, and it's often the most powerful people, white males, that have a lot of money, that are kind of denying climate change and the seriousness of it. But among young people, it could be quite the opposite, because studies that I have performed have shown that these young people are actually feeling that they cannot influence not only climate change, but societal issues at large. And if we go back to the fact that hope is an existential must, this is perhaps the only way that these young people find a way to feel hope. And then, of course, if we want to fight this climate change denial, it's not enough with giving them facts about climate change. We perhaps also need to help young people to find more constructive sources of hope that are based in more science-based things that are happening that could be positive signs regarding climate change. So I think it's important to take account of, although theoreticians would say that this is not real hope, but for some young people, it is actually giving them hope about the future. But there are other sources of hope, and for instance, critical hope. And I have shown in my studies, but also studies in the United States and other countries have shown that there is also some young people who are actually rather pessimistic. So they acknowledge the problem, but they kind of refuse to give in to hopelessness. So they argue that without hope, there is no reason to live. I kind of refuse to give in to this kind of hopelessness. So this is a kind of defiant hope, I call it, that is quite common that young people argue in this way. A more evolved form of this is when young people, and it's often a little bit older young people, late adolescents, young adults, because this demands a lot of complex thinking. They can kind of describe negative aspects regarding climate change, but they can switch perspective, and they also can mention positive aspects like, yeah, but at least, I mean, more people are talking about climate change now than 20 years ago, when there will be more catastrophes also in the kind of rich Nordic part of the world, then we will take climate change seriously. Historically, we have solved difficult problems when we go together and do something. So they go back and forth between the problem and hopeful things that they see. Then there are, of course, if we go back to Snyder's zeros, also pathways that they come up with on how we can deal with climate change. So the young people that feel hope, some of them have strong trust in themselves and that they can do something. So they emphasize that, but I know that I can do things in everyday life, like eating more climate friendly, not fly that much. I can influence others by talking with them. I can also do something collective with other people. And this gives me hope. And when I do studies in Sweden, the collective part is not that common to mention. It was a little bit more common during the time of Fridays for Future when Greta Thunberg was very active. She came from, or she come from Sweden. So of course that inspired, but that is over since a couple of years. So now it's back more to the individual things, but still it can give hope. Of course, we cannot solve climate change alone, not even if we go together with others. And many who have hope also argue that they have hope because they have trust. They have seen that other actors are doing something. There are technological solutions going on. Scientists are working with this. There are a global climate change movement that still is active. There is perhaps even a politician that has taken this seriously. It's not so common to mention politicians anymore because young people do not have a big trust in the political system. But some might have met in school, for instance, a local politician that worked with this. So they have kind of been lucky to see that there are things happening in different kind of seeds of change going on, and therefore they feel hope. So I have kind of taken this qualitative study, made it into quantitative studies, and measured hope based on denial. And we can see that those that are high on hope based on denial, they feel hope, but it's based on denial. They are not active concerning climate change, so this hope is negatively related. While if we take these more positive sources, cognitive restructuring, going back and forth, trusting oneself and trusting others, well, then these people are actually more active. So here hope is positively related to being engaged, but also in everyday life, but also intention to vote for a party that takes climate change seriously. And this holds also when we control for other more well-known predictors of climate change engagement. So we can see here that if we kind of concentrate on hope as an emotion, we need to take account of the sources because they take out each other otherwise. Those who are high on hope can be both those who deny the problem, but it could also be people who actually are building it on more realistic sources. So what can educators and communicators do then if we want to promote hope? Well, first of all, we cannot skip over these negative and difficult emotions. We need to learn how to live with and respond to difficult, negative emotions. For instance, we can acquire research-based knowledge about our media emotions. And what are media emotions? They are our feelings and emotions about our emotions about climate change. So for instance, we perhaps have this view that if a young person is worried, then it's something negative. It's kind of will lead to illogical decisions, or it will lead to it's equal to low mental well-being. Is this really correct? We need to kind of catch our thinking about emotions and challenge it by looking at the research that do exist. Also, if we work with young people, we cannot just skip over the negative emotions and go to something hopeful. We need to stay with them in the difficult emotions and validate it, that it's normal to feel depressed and anxious about climate change. If we can do that, studies have shown that it is associated with better coping on an individual level. Young people can then start to deal with these emotions in a better way. And we need to give room to and put words on emotion. We need to start to discuss our emotions, because then we can do something constructive with them. It's the first step of doing something constructive. And it's also related to affective injustices, because young people do not have as much power as adults. So their emotions are often not taken seriously, especially if they come from groups that are perhaps females. Worries are not taken as seriously as men's worries, studies have shown. So if we start to talk about it and kind of dig up the values that are underneath these emotions, because often it's about values that are threatened. We value nature, for instance. Of course, we are worried then about climate change. It's totally logical. And we can then start to discuss and also take in this in societal deliberations around climate change. And here I think it's very important to combine psychological knowledge about emotions with critical approaches, because psychology is good at emotions. We know a lot about what happens with our bodies when we feel emotions, how we can cope in constructive manners, and so on. But as I said before, these emotions are about a societal problem that is related to power dimensions. And many actors out there want to manipulate our emotions, like this hope based on denial. Where does that come from? Well, there are, for instance, politicians who say, vote for me, and I will show that there is no point in you worrying. I will give you hope because climate change is a hoax, and so on. So we need to actually also give young people the awareness of that, even though emotions feels very personal, and they are to a certain degree because we feel them with our bodies, they are still also related to a lot of power dimensions, both on the small level, but also the big level. And this is important to be critical about, because lately there has been big studies in a classroom context in the United States, for instance, not only about climate change, but where one takes this more socio-emotional intervention program that is purely psychological, but they don't really work. Many studies have shown that lately, because young people then start to think that if they feel worried about something, it's a sign of that they are suffering from mental disorder or something. And this could be very dangerous. So we need also to have this critical perspective. Perhaps it's not at all strange that you feel worried, because very important things are threatened by different problems like climate change. And of course, there are also a lot of people arguing that this emotional competence, where you just try to promote, for instance, hope without talking about the problem, could be a way of undermining a critical approach to societal issues. I thought that I would talk a little bit more about hope as agency work, but I don't really have time, so I will skip over two slides and go to the end of this presentation and conclude a little bit about this. Because if we want to promote a more hopeful outlook concerning the global future among young people, if we kind of think that hope is an existential must in a sense, because otherwise it's very easy to kind of fall into depression and hopelessness, and this will not be good for an active engagement and not be good for mental well-being either. Well, then we cannot skip over conflicts and negative emotions. We need to be able to deal with that also, because that is what young people feel today mostly, these rather difficult emotions, and we as adults cannot be afraid of that. Instead, we need to have serious existential and critical discussions about these emotions. And these are just as important as focusing on trying to talk about positive images of the future and pathway to reach these more sustainable futures. That is also important, but we cannot skip over the feelings that many young people have regarding this issue. And then this is that you need to focus both on these bigger emotions if you feel hope and worry about the future, but this with conflicts in your own life. That was the other part that I was supposed to talk about, that when young people have found a way to be active in everyday life, whether it is in the small everyday life where they do certain thing, eating climate friendly, or if they join a movement, there will be a lot of conflicts, of course, because it's hard to live in a sustainable manner in an unsustainable society. And if you go into a group and challenge power structures, you will have a lot of conflicts and people kind of putting pressure on you. And that was the part that I didn't have the time, but we're working with that, where we kind of identified different ways of dealing with these conflicts. Some ways that lead more to hopelessness and others that lead more to hope and continuing engagement. So it's important to acknowledge both these aspects. And then I think, and this is related a little bit to the last thing here, to the fact that I have also been involved with education about sustainability. And of course, the group that I'm working with is in school. So that is a way where they learn about climate change, but also it is the possibility to deal with these issues. And then educators, teachers are, of course, very important. And I have argued in articles that it is important that they get opportunities in teacher education to learn about emotions also, and how that influence learning and how that influence engagement concerning these issues and other aspects. So, thank you very much. That was all for me. Unfortunately, I did not have time to look at how long this, I was supposed to do it earlier today, but since I was tired, so I needed to skip some aspects because it was too long. But thanks. That was all for me this time.
Gracias, muchas gracias, María. Ha sido muy interesante y completo, aunque faltaba la última parte, ¿no? Vinculado con la agencia. Nosotros hemos leído tus trabajos, los estudiantes que te están siguiendo también. Eres una referencia en el trabajo de la esperanza, vinculadas con los jóvenes principalmente. Y justo quería comentar brevemente que esta esperanza crítica que tú has identificado, constructiva, también la estamos observando en nuestro país, en México. También hemos podido observar esa esperanza de más, digamos, radical, activa, de salvar lo que se pueda, que está vinculada con el pesimismo. Podemos ser pesimistas, pero sentir esa esperanza de todavía salvar lo que queda. Y en nuestro proyecto de investigación con los demás colegas y también entre docentes, muchas veces la pregunta es, ¿cómo transmitimos esperanza si a veces nos sentimos pesimistas, ¿no? Y entonces ese es un gran desafío que tienen los docentes, que tienen los activistas, de evocar esperanza en una situación desesperanzadora, ¿no? Me llamó mucho la atención, ¿no? También esa abertura, ¿no? Desde la psicología a las visiones más críticas de las ciencias sociales, como la sociología, ¿no? Que intenta incluir la visión sociocultural, la construcción de las emociones. En esto creo que estamos muy en sintonía desde cómo estamos trabajando las emociones. Y solo hay una causa, por ejemplo, de esperanza que nosotros encontramos en personas comunes y corrientes no activistas, que también hay una esperanza hacia que la naturaleza pueda adaptarse al cambio climático y entonces que por ahí, digamos, no haya tantos desastres o tanta pérdida de especies, ¿no? Que es un poco, sí, una esperanza que se acerca a veces a la falsa esperanza, pero también una conciencia, creo, ¿no? Del poder también de los elementos naturales, ¿no? Que no sé si también en tus estudios encontraste esa esperanza hacia que la naturaleza pueda de todas maneras adaptarse. Y de todas maneras te dejaría unos minutos para, si quieres, también mencionar esa parte que dejaste fuera de la agencia porque también es importante. Entonces, te dejamos la palabra para que puedas concluir tú, destacando lo más importante que no has podido decir.
Yes, thank you. Very interesting to hear about the projects that you have also, because it's so very important that these studies about climate change emotions are also performed in different countries all over the world, because of course these aspects are related also. Some aspects are general for people in a sense that it seems like that we need this hope, and even though we are pessimistic, we kind of try to force ourselves. So that seems to be something that is universal. But there are other aspects that, of course, are culturally different. It depends on the political system, but also changes through time. And this with nature, I haven't actually heard that much among young people. And I don't know why, actually, because Swedish young people that I have mostly worked with, now we are also working with Finnish people, but that is the same. They are neighboring countries. We are very close to nature, all of them. So it's kind of strange that I haven't really encountered anything about nature, because of course there could be a kind of false belief perhaps that nature is really kind of resilient. To a certain degree nature is, but there are these boundaries also that can be breached. But I was thinking also that nature could be a source of hope, that being outside in nature is good for your well-being, and that has been shown in Swedish context, and we are actually working with that because there are some different kind of discussions going on there. Also, we know that nature contact is very good for well-being, but on the other hand, if you're really worried about climate change and other environmental problems, you perhaps can see what is happening you can see that changes are happening very quickly and so on. So it could be a source for anxiety also. And so that is something that we are looking at right now. And then the other question that you were asking about was hope as agency work, and that is another aspect that I'm working with a doctoral student at University of Oulu in Finland, where I now work mostly, and that is about actually, when you have found some kind of, you perhaps feel after you have had lectures in school about climate change that yes, it's a really serious problem, but I still can see that we can influence still. So you have a positive goal, and you perhaps have found one way that you can be engaged. Let us say, I want to eat more climate friendly. It's a small thing, but still something. But is that enough? Should we be glad as a teacher or communicator if we meet a young person? Of course, they have taken some steps in acknowledging the problem, seeing some ways to fight it, and trying to do something. But often we leave them there, and it is when you start to try to live sustainable in a more or less unsustainable society when the difficulties arise. And that goes for both if you just want to do small things in everyday life, or if you are engaged in a social movement of some kind. And I have also done interviews with young people who are really active in social movements. And of course, there's a lot of conflicts. I mean, if you want to eat climate friendly, your friends perhaps think you are silly. You perhaps get tempted to eat something else. It's expensive. If you are engaged in the movement, you will realize that it takes a lot of time and effort and you are almost burnt out. Perhaps those who are engaged are not as idealistic as you thought they were. They are more out to get power in an organization, and conflicts are there. And this Hope as agency work is to we try to pinpoint different ways that young people, even if they can see this conflict, so they are not denying them. They know that, for instance, okay, I know that to eat climate friendly, I will not solve climate change. My actions does not perhaps matter that much, but they still can overcome these conflicts and still are active. And what we are looking at right now are, I have in studies pinpointed many different ways of thinking about this and dealing with this. But two major ways are hope as or black and white thinking. That is the negative way that is very easy to fall into, where we get stuck in this negative and we start to argue in a very either or manner. Like, if not everyone is active, there is no point in me doing anything. If I'm not perfect all the time, it's no point in me continuing trying to be active. If not every country takes climate change seriously, there's no point in my country taking this. This is very easy to fall into this black and white thinking. And psychology has shown that this way of arguing will lead to hopelessness and depression and so on. And it will be a sure way to stop being engaged, because life isn't perfect. So there would never be the case that everybody is active, that everybody is nice, and so on. So this way is not so constructive then. But there are ways of arguing around these conflicts. Yes, I know that my actions perhaps does not matter, but, and we call that dialectical thinking, that you can transcend this conflict with a third element, but I can at least be a role model. I can inspire my friends, and social norms are important. Someone needs to take the first step. My friends are perhaps not active, but I know that others are active, and then on an aggregated level we can have an effect. If I'm not, I ate meat yesterday and I was not perfect, but it's just to start all over again and try. Everybody makes a mistake. So this way of arguing is something that is related to that you can still be active. And then also deontological thinking is a way that some young people argue, and that is more that they don't look at the consequences, first of all, of their actions, but more that it doesn't matter if nobody else is doing something, I still need to do what is right, like this ethical principle. So they continue then. So this is something that we are working with right now, trying to look at also groups with activists that are activists concerning food, for instance, that Sonia, my doctoral student, are coding that data. There are interviews with them. We also do quantitative studies where we look at this way of arguing around conflicts and look at how are these related to different kinds of engagement and so on.
Muchas gracias, María. La conferencia fue, la verdad, muy útil. Nos da gusto que están trabajando también con activistas y vamos a cerrar este día de hoy, además porque no estabas bien y queremos que descanses, pero esperamos poder seguir en
Ah,
contactos e invitarte nuevamente para conocer vuestros nuevos resultados y compararlos con los que estamos generando aquí en México.
it would be really interesting. So I'm really open to all kinds of collaboration. So thank you.
Muchas gracias, María.
Yes.
Por lo tanto, cerramos con esta fantástica conferencia, la, la temporada de este año del seminario. Y si la producción encontrará fondos para el año que viene, tendremos una otra temporada más cativante, más interesante, eh, donde vamos a presentar también, intentaremos presentar a investigadores de otros continentes, de otros países, para intercambiar resultados y hacer conocer otras investigaciones. Quiero agradecer o sea, perché mi ha accompagnato in tutta esta también temporada Paola, nuestra intérprete, que la paciencia que ha tenido con todos los ponentes, ya que ha hablado de distintos países, desde Australia, Finlandia, Noruega, por lo tanto un inglés siempre distinto y diferente, y muchas veces con muy poca atención a la traducción, ¿no? Porque se olvidan, ¿no?, que existe un mundo que no habla inglés. Y agradezco el SEIC, el Instituto, Alice, para acompañarnos y vamos a ver qué vamos a organizar para el año que viene. Por lo tanto, stay tuned para el año que viene y vamos a ver qué pasa. Hasta luego.